Well, good afternoon, all of our dear friends. What a joy it is to welcome you as the Christmastide season comes to an end. Of course, this has been a holiday season unlike many others, but how happy I am that we can spend some time together this afternoon. I've been thinking of Christmas tides past, of those times during the war full of hardship and great sacrifice. But I too was casting my mind back to happier years, particularly the Christmas tide in 1759. Now, the uh, season starts with Christmas Day on the 25th, then goes all the way through to Twelfth Night. Tomorrow we'll be celebrating Twelfth Night. It's the merriest day of the Christmas season. Balls and sleigh parties, people come visiting, and it is at night I will be serving my great cake. The cooks here at Mount Vernon have been very busy getting it prepared. You know, it calls for 40 eggs, 4 pounds of butter, 4 pounds of sugar, 5 pounds of flour, and to that, of course, you add candied fruit peels and nuts, and it's doused in brandy. And it's an old recipe, a traditional kind of cake to be served on Twelfth Night. And how happy I will be tomorrow to sit down and preside at the table as we cut that up and dish everyone up. For I'm sure many of you know that Twelfth Night is very special to General Wahsington and I. It was on Twelfth Night in '59 that he and I were married. And I almost want to paint a picture of what that night was like. I had been a young widow when I was introduced to. He was then Colonel George Wahsington. I was a very busy woman, had two little children, was overseeing a large estate. Well, that was March of '58 that my dear friends, Major and Mrs. Chamberlain, well, they invited me to come for a visit. And at first I thought, well, I haven't got time. The spring planting would soon go in, and but my children had just got over colds. I didn't like to expose them to that raw March air. Well, it is considered very uncivil here in Virginia to decline such an invitation. So I packed up the children and off we went. And it just so happened that while I was visiting the Chamberlains, a young soldier was riding towards Williamsburg. Now, Colonel Wahsington was never in the capital in those days. He was out fighting the French in the western wilderness. But then, as now, he was the finest horseman in all of Virginia. So when they had dispatches to be sent to the governor, he carried them, for he could ride so swiftly. As he crossed the Pamunkey River, coming into New Kent County, who did he meet on the ferry but Major Chamberlain? And the major brought him home where I was visiting, and well, that was that. We were introduced, and then the next morning, before he continued his journey to Williamsburg, he asked if he could call upon me at my own home. I told him that would be very agreeable. And on his second visit, he asked me a most particular question. And I replied, I most certainly shall, my dear Colonel Wahsington. I had agreed to become his lady bride, and we would wait a few months before we would marry. He still had commitments to the army, that you see. Well, as soon as he made his offer, I wrote to my seamstress in London. I desired of her, I wrote, a new gown, in the latest fashion, though not to be extravagant, but most important, neither to be in mourning. Well, I understand that as I was writing to Mrs. Shelbury, my seamstress, the general wrote to his tailor. He commissioned a suit of blue velvet for a tall man to be sent. But once his commitments with the army were completed, he came back to New Kent County, and on Twelfth Night, the 6th of January, he and I were married. My gown was gold brocade, and I wore purple silk dancing slippers, and well, you must imagine, we married at candle-lighting time. The sun had gone down, the whole place lit by candles. Well, he looked very fine in that blue velvet suit. Then his hair was still red. His eyes are still as blue as ever. We danced a minuet in that candlelight. And, well, the memory of that happy day is one that has sustained me through trials and difficulties in my life. You see, I had many suitors as a young widow, and I turned a number of them down. I was seeking, you understand, not only an agreeable consort for life, but a father for my children, and what has proved to be our situation, a worthy partner. And so tomorrow we'll have our family and friends gathered round us. I'll sit at the table with the great cake, and I'm having the General's favorite Madeira wine decanted. And we'll perhaps talk on those memories and think of the other times, the Christmases and the 12th nights that we have spent together, both at Mount Vernon and far from those we love. Well, I'm looking forward to celebrating that. Oh, and in fact, now no one tell the General if you see him. I'm having delivered his favorite cologne, his favorite scent. While we were in New York during the war, he got Caswell Massey's Formula Number 6, and he became quite fond of it. Well, a few months ago, I noticed his supply was running low, so I sent a letter to some friends there, and it's going to be delivered from Alexandria this afternoon. It's quite a surprise for him. Well, forgive me, my dear friends. You know how I am. I can talk a long time without stopping, and that's terribly uncivil. So please, if you have questions, ask them. I'm happy to answer them. Was the General a good stepfather? Oh, he was indeed, my friends. I never had to remind my children that they should think of him as their father. They called him dearest papa from the very first. My son was 4 and my daughter was 2 when we were married, and he loved them as if they were his own. He always took particular care of our Patsy. You know, she was very unwell as a child, and he did everything he could to ease her distress. You know, we had her seen by many physicians, and as her legal guardian, he oversaw the accounts in her name. So, if you look at those account books, you'll see where he's paid this physician for the doctor's fees, and then the apothecary for the medicines. And underneath that, and from his own monies, you'll see where he would purchase Patsy a hair ribbon or perhaps a piece of sugar candy, some trifle to cheer her after being examined once again. Oh, I'm so glad that you asked after that. He was indeed a very fine stepfather to my son and daughter. Oh, my dear, could you put the questions into the private chat for me? I'm afraid I'm having a little difficulty seeing some of them. Sarah, my dear, did you hear my question? Oh, does he flirt with the ladies? Do you know, ladies have always been drawn to him, the gentlemen too, and children. I've never worried about his affections for me. I'll never forget the first time I ever laid eyes on the General. I was still married to my first husband, Mr. Custis. We were attending a ball there in the capital city, Williamsburg. And if you've never been to the old governor's palace, the ballroom is one of the largest rooms in all Virginia, beautifully painted in blue and gold. The chandeliers looked as if they held 1,000 candles. Of course, in the old days, the men would be dressed out in their velvet suits and their dainty slippers, the ladies in their silks, everyone powdered. Oh, it was a pretty sight. And we were attending a ball, Mr. Custis and I. And I remember the General, he was the colonel then, he had been riding, bringing dispatches to the governor, and burst into the ballroom. Now imagine a soldier in his uniform, having ridden for days. He's got dirt on his cheek and twigs in his hair. He looked at all the company, so finely attired, gathered round, turned bright red, stepped back as if to excuse himself from the company. Oh, the young girls, the belles of Philadelphia, had surrounded him and pulled him into the dancing. And I remember remarking to Mr. Custis that, why, that young soldier in his stiff riding boots dances far better than all of you dandified gentlemen. And the General has always done what is correct. Since the time he was a young man, he has schooled himself on the proper behavior for a gentleman. And so to give compliments to the ladies, to make people feel at their ease, but it's an excellent part of his character. Well, I'm afraid that though we both enjoy music a great deal, neither the general nor I can raise a note. Now, you had mentioned the children. When Patsy and Jackie were small, we engaged a music master, Mr. Stadler. My Patsy played the harpsichord, and Jackie played the violin. And so we've enjoyed music. And again, not only is he still the finest horseman in all Virginia, he's still the greatest dancer. And so it's not unusual to see him standing up dancing with the ladies after dinner when we have company come round. So we enjoy that a great deal. Well, I am afraid the question is who minded the children when I was with the general during the war? By the time the war had come, my daughter Patsy had died, I'm afraid to say, and my son was married, and in fact, my four grandchildren were born during the war. And in some ways, that freed me to go each and every winter. I'll never forget. In April of 75, I stood on the steps of our home and waved off. He was still then Colonel Wahsington. He was going with others as a delegate to the Continental Congress up in Philadelphia. Oh, I expected that he would return within 6 or 8 weeks, but it was June that year that I received a letter. My dearest, he wrote, as I am now about to depart this city, I could not think of leaving it without dropping you a line. And that line was to tell me he had been made a general, indeed, commander in chief of this new Continental Army. He was going to Boston. But he wrote, I look forward to a happy reunion with you at Mount Vernon sometime in the fall. And of course, we know now that that was not to be. Instead, I would go up to Boston that first year, the New York, Valley Forge, Morristown, Middlebrook, and it was a great honor that I was able to go. I, along with many other ladies, did my part for our patriot cause. My mother had brought me up to be an old-fashioned Virginia housewife. You learn to feed your family, you learn to clothe the family, your family doctor. And I was able to apply what mother had taught me. When I returned in the spring and summers, I would see if more cloth could be produced in the spinning house. What could we pull up from the cellars in the smokehouse? I'm afraid the Congress never provisioned the army as they ought to have been. And many ladies looked to their own stores. We raised funds together. But I think the greatest honor was once I was inoculated against the smallpox, that I was able to take my basket of cures and go amongst the enlisted men, offering comfort and care where I could. Again, I think I'll never have any greater honor than to be of service to those dear, brave soldiers. What are we doing for the 12 days of Christmas? Now, Christmas Day, of course, is very solemn. You pray and fast, you're well churched. But again, as the days draw closer to Twelfth Night and the 6th of January, you'll go calling and pay visits to all of your beloved friends and family. Our New Year's Day is a day of gift exchanges where the children might get a coin, an orange, perhaps the girls will get a hair ribbon. And again, 12th night, we will celebrate. That's generally when the balls and feasts happen. I had mentioned the great cake, but if you come to Mount Vernon, you will see our hedgehog cake. He's made of marzipan with currants for his eyes and nose and little slivers of almonds for his spines. We have jellies and syllabubs, mince pies. We have almond cakes, a great many delights that have been prepared by Doll and Lucy in the kitchen. Again, many balls alongside the feasting, and that's why Twelfth Night became such a popular time to be married. Why, you've always got everyone gathered round, a large, bountiful feast laid out. You might as well have the minister say the ceremony. Have we ever had a Christmas tree? That is not our custom. We like to cut the pine boughs and holly to put over the doorways to bring some of that evergreen into the house at a time when, well, the days are short and bitter cold to remind us of spring to come. But I understand in the German states, they'll not just cut the little boughs, but whole trees be brought in. My goodness, it sounds like quite an exciting tradition, but that's not something that we do at Mount Vernon. Oh, and where did we spend our honeymoon? Well, I had never been far from where I was born in all my days. My father's plantation lay about 30 miles outside of Williamsburg. My first husband was our neighbor, so I'd never traveled far. The general and I were married at the home I had shared with Mr. Custis. And it was a bitter, icy cold winter that year in '59. And I don't think the general thought it would be a good idea to take me far from everything and everyone I'd known in that winter time. He waited until the spring. So there we were with Jacky and Patsy, very cozy there in New Kent. We did travel into Williamsburg and visit all of our friends, the Blairs and the Randolphs. Of course, the general, his favorite place to sup was at Mrs. Campbell's. She's known for her oysters. That's his favorite food. And they still had a few of them at that time. How involved with the cooking have I ever been? Well, when I was a girl, my father was clerk of our county court. He was also a planter. We had 500 acres. And father owned about 20 people, though none of them worked in our house. So when I was a girl, I had said mother taught me of everything to feed a family. So I learned how to keep a kitchen garden, how to pickle and dry and make preserves and jellies of your fruits and vegetables. Girls are taught to butcher, to salt, to smoke, and cure meats. So I learned all of that myself. Now, when I was married to Mr. Custis, my life changed a great deal. You see, to my father's 500 acres, Mr. Custis owned 17,500 acres. And he owned more than 300 people, including those that worked inside our house. So I no longer did what I call the drudgery work. I oversee everything as I do at Mount Vernon. And so I have my hand in it. I'll go each morning before breakfast to oversee the making of that meal. The general and I were both brought up on prosperous plantations, but we were brought up to that old maxim, waste not, want not. So in the mornings, I'll inspect the food from the dinner the day before. If it's not spoiled, it'll be cooked into a breakfast hash. And then after breakfast, I will have Doll and Lucy. Again, they are the cooks at Mount Vernon. Accompany me. This time of year down to the cellar for fruits and vegetables, but in spring and summer we'll go to the lower garden, we'll go to the smokehouse, to the dairy, and I determined what is served on table each and every day. You see, when a lady sits down for her dinner, she doesn't just determine what's served on the table. She dishes everyone up, she carves, and so I have my hand in it all. It isn't unusual if there's a particular guest you want to honor or an occasion you want to make special, that a lady will perhaps make one or two dishes herself, again, to display the skills that she was taught. But everything of the cooking and baking at Mount Vernon is done by Doll and Lucy. Oh, what did my children do? Jacky and Patsy, what did they like to do for fun? What kind of games did they play? Oh, they enjoyed a good many things. The boys particularly like to play at leapfrog, and they'll play with bats and balls. They used to race one another with the hoops and sticks and see who could roll them longest down the east lawn. And so they played a good deal of that. We also like to play at cards and dice. The children had, as I said, their music lessons, but they also had dancing lessons. And so the general, I'll never forget, as soon as we got to Mount Vernon, it was April of '59, he wrote to our factor in London and purchased for them all number of things. They purchased clothing. He purchased toys and gifts. He also purchased teeth cleaning kits for them so that they could keep their teeth clean. Oh, and my friend Ziva would like to know, what did Santa Claus bring presents for the children at Christmas? That's not something that's part of our Christmas traditions. Again, I understand in the Low Countries and in the Germanic states that no, all of our gifts generally will come from the children's mama and papa, or perhaps a godparent or a favorite family friend. I'll never forget my dear friend in Philadelphia, Eliza Powell. She sent a friend of ours a pair of rabbit fur lined gloves. She said that he hadn't been corresponding with her, and the only reason she could think was that his hands were frozen by the cold. So she sent warm gloves so that that person would continue writing to her. So it's generally given by friends and loved ones. Oh, how did we celebrate our anniversary over the years? And well, thank you, my dear, for sending that fine felicitation on the special day we'll celebrate tomorrow. Well, again, 12th night has always been a night of celebration and feasting. And again, the General and I will generally have our family round us. I'll serve the great cake. I shouldn't be surprised if toasts were made. Again, if you've got any Madeira and great cake, perhaps you'll toast to the General. Oh, what is my favorite place at Mount Vernon? Do you know, I think even on, again, these very short and sometimes bitter cold winter days, to stand out on the piazza, to look at the river, and to remember all of the fine blessings that we have here at our beloved Mount Vernon. You know, the General was away almost 9 years during the war, and I worry that as the new government is founded, they may well ask him that he should go again to serve. And of course, you know, the General has always said that he cannot hear his country call, but he must answer with veneration and love. So when we are home and when we are home together, to stand there and remember how fortunate we are to be at such a beloved place. You know, the General said that no estate in all of United America is more pleasantly situated. And, well, even today, which is rather overcast and gray, it can be said that that is how it is, so prettily situated. Ah, now what is my favorite pastime or hobby? Well, I very much enjoy needlework. I was taught very plain sewing, and we still do a good deal of that. But I like to express myself in embroidery. And I've made embroidered pockets for my daughter. I'm making some for the granddaughters now. I like quilting. I enjoy having the skill to make something that is not only beautiful, but also useful. And again, it reminds me of what my mother had taught me when I was a girl. You see, I knew other young ladies near Williamsburg, or some went to schools or had tutors, and I rather liked the idea, oh, to learn languages and to study history. I thought that would be very fine, but mother said, no, my dear, the best education is that which prepares a child to be of use in the world. And I had a very practical education, so to be able to take a practical skill and make something that is useful as well as beautiful, I find that very rewarding. What a fine question. Thank you, my dear. What drink would I prefer as we toast tomorrow? Well, the General, as I said, he likes his Madeira, and I like that a good deal too. But we have also had recently a new kind of wine, and it comes from France. I understand it's French monks that make it, and it's a white wine, and it's effervescent. It's got bubbles in it, and it's quite an innovation, quite a novelty. Of course, I also like when we have company to make up a good rum punch, to heat up rum or perhaps brandy, and we'll add to that sugar and lemons, and nutmeg and cinnamon. I've many fine punch bowls, and to prepare that so that the ladies and gentlemen may all partake. I enjoy that a good deal as well. What did I wear on my wedding day? Well, again, when I wrote to my seamstress in London, I didn't say I want this color or that fabric. I just said I wanted it to be in the latest fashion and not in mourning. Remember, as a widow, I was still dressing in black. And what Mrs. Shelbury sent was a gown of gold brocade, and with it I wore a white silk petticoat shot with silver and purple silk dancing slippers. Well, it was, oh, it's hard to think it was many years ago, but it was a very happy memory. And if you are members of Mount Vernon, tomorrow, if you join us here again, you'll be able to see pieces of my wedding gown and the very slippers I wore when I danced that minuet. Oh, what did I think of John and Abigail Adams? Again, when I think of those girls that I envied when I was a child that had that education, Mrs. Adams is a most excellent, learned lady. And again, the union between she and her husband is one I admire very much. The General and I are fortunate that we have never been much separated from one another. And the same cannot be said of them. But I understand they treasure the correspondence that they have. And when I was up in Boston, it was a pleasure to know her. Was it a trend to make a sort of New Year's resolution? Well, I don't know that it's anything terribly exact or official, but we look at the end of the year and we can reflect on the things that we enjoyed, things perhaps we would want to change. Why, the new year is almost like a fresh piece of paper, isn't it? And let us hope that we'll write a peaceful and prosperous new year. Now, I understand we have time for just one more question. Oh, it is no secret that the founding fathers could agree on very little. Oh, can I share my vision for the American experiment? Why, what a fine question. I think you know that if we look back on the sacrifice that was made for the patriot cause for independency, and there are many various ideas on how we should proceed forward. We should remember, as the general tries to remind us, that we should look and think what is best for the country altogether, not what does my faction want or what does that faction want. What will be best for our country and for those future generations to remember the sacrifice that was made in the cause of independency, to think of the millions of future generations. What will best serve them? And I hope that we'll be able to join together in moving forward in, I like that turn of phrase, that grand American experiment. Well, friends, I am sorry to say that our time has come to an end, but I hope that in this last bit of the Christmastide season, you will have your dear loved ones about you. And again, my best wishes for a happy and a prosperous new year.